Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Grafton Select Board meeting workshop here for August 10, 2021. I call the meeting order at 7 p.m. First order of business, can we all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everybody. First up, before we get into George Hill Road discussion with the board, I just want to ask the board, I made a last-minute amendment to the agenda, and on E for discussion, host community agreement regarding Juicy Nature's Remedy in Marchetti. Is there any objections from the board on having this discussion tonight?
No.
Nope.
Thank you. Okay, so first up, then we will go in order A, B, C, D, and E tonight, George Hill Road. So, purpose of this discussion here tonight was in response to the deteriorating condition of George Hill Road and to have a general discussion about, basically what are our plans, like what options do we have? And I'm going to turn this over real quick to Evan, who has been working diligently with town departments on can you give us a status update on the road, I guess, or anything that you have before we start asking questions and taking any direction?
Sure. So I did meet with Paul Canayer and Brian Zazurko regarding George Hill Road again. I had wanted to see if we could just mill and overlay the road, and that would obviously be a lot less expensive of a proposition. They do not believe that that is possible. It was an oil and stone road at one point. They just paved over the top of, so the base is really unstable, which is causing a lot of our issues. So the project itself is fairly large. Again, it's probably in the neighborhood of roughly $5 million. We have to do drainage updates. We have to take easements. And we have to do a whole bunch of engineering work. So we did hear from the legislature that they put in earmark into the budget for several projects, one of which being the design of construction for George Hill Road. That earmark is roughly $800,000. However, having done this for a number of years, I want to just make sure that we don't count our chickens before they're hatched. As a lot of times this money goes in, these bond bill dollars go into the DOT's kitty as a whole, and then get reallocated to someplace that's considered to be a higher priority. So I am working with accounting and finance to find out when we might see those funds and to ensure that we're getting them. And then, then we would go out and select a designer and go from there.
Evan, do we have a timeline on when they decide the bond bill? Is this going to be next year?
So that's one of the things I'm trying to clarify. It seems to vary based on what other things they have in the pipeline. They originally told me that it was hopeful that we would see this get released sometime in September of this year. So I have to continually I just have to keep following up with accounting and finance.
Is there anything that this board that you feel we can do from an advocacy point with the state legislator?
I don't think so currently. Both Representative Meridian and Senator Moore were aware of this. So this is an earmark that was requested in 2019. So they're the ones that actually notified us. So I don't think the problem, any issue that we'll run into currently will be with the local legislators. I think it'll be with releasing that money from DOT. And I think we need to take a little bit of a wait and see approach and find out from accounting and finance if that money is guaranteed and when we might see it. And then if there's an issue there, that's when I think we start to push, in my opinion.
Any questions? Yeah, Ray.
Yep. So Evan, I went down George Hill Road last week with my wife, and not that makes any difference, but north of Stowe Road, that road is absolutely horrible. I'm not sure why it's in the condition it's in as it is now. That we haven't done something sooner on this. Mm-hmm. South of Stowe Road, it appears that the road could be ground and redone, but that's neither here nor there. $800,000 is great if we can get that for design. We all know that design and spending that money is gonna take probably a year and a half. The takings and the easements are probably gonna take another year to a year and a half. So now we're 3 years down the road, and that $5 million is not $5 million anymore. That $5 million is probably close to 7 now. So, what I'd like to see us do, and I think it's a great idea to get to, because one of my suggestions was to get it designed and get it, get it out there so that we can get prices on it. But we really need to address north of Stowe Road in the very, very near future. Now, whether that's oil and stoning again to try to make it a little smoother, I mean, all the different layers of oil and stone are breaking off, and it's all just peeling up. Plowing it must be a nightmare. But we really need to address that. I think in the short term, and maybe all of George Hill Road. But my big concern is that we're going to be 3 years down the road, and we're still not going to touch George Hill Road, and it's going to cost us a lot more money. So I get, again, concerned about the easements, the takings, the retention ponds that are required. There's an enormous amount of water that comes off that uphill location all the way down the entire road. Drainage is going to have to be put in. That drainage is going to have to go somewhere. It's going to end up hopefully clean in the Great Meadows, but we're a long way away from doing anything there, and I really think that we need to do something short term to help out the people who live on George Hill Road.
Go ahead, go ahead.
Go ahead, Kelly.
So I have a question, and I don't even know if this is possible, but if we have potential money coming to us that may or may not come to fruition, would it be helpful to us if we put something on the fall town meeting saying that we're going to pay for it with our capital money and hope to be reimbursed with this money? Is this money something that can reimburse us, and that helps move the state, say, this is how serious we are, we've already paid for it, we need this desperately, and get something going so that maybe by, I don't know how long it takes to design something like that, but gets that ball rolling sooner than later.
Yes, and so that was something that Paul and I had discussed as well. It can definitely be done. I think we just have to cross a couple more T's before we stick our necks out that far. And so I'm hopeful that end of this week, middle of next week, we're going to have a more finite answer of how firm that money is and when we would see it, so that we'll know that. But we could certainly add an article to the warrant that says we're gonna put whatever the number is, $800,000 into an authorization to spend, and with the hopes of reimbursement. And then if we don't get the money, we have to make a decision whether we actually complete the study or complete the design, or if you wait longer, right? So you could certainly do it so that you could reimburse, but I would just be cautious with that.
But it's nice to know that, I mean, right now we're just discussing options, so there's a potential option.
Absolutely. Yep. And we're I think we would put that against our free cash, would be my looking at the numbers currently, if that's the route we were going to go.
Yeah, I just wanted to know if Fay Mountain Road was also addressed, or could be addressed, or at least talked about as part of this project too. So it's on the south side at the bottom of George Hill Road. There's only a couple houses there. It's in the same condition as George Hill Road. They have drainage issues. So I'm just unsure if it would make sense to add on this little bit of roadway at the end of George Hill along with this project, because it is another area that needs to be addressed. And, we may save some funding in the long run by doing it all together. So I would like to know your opinion, Paul and Brian's opinion, on that little area, because that has also been forgotten for a long time.
Right. So in my conversations with Paul, we were talking about doing Leland, I think Fay Hill, and another one. He wanted to try to knock those ones that all touch
Great.
out in one shot, to kind of get like a little quadrant done. And thought that we could, if we were borrowing money to either borrowing, however we wind up doing this, borrowing money to do George Hill Road, we would have our roads money that we could do the other ones that touch this with inside of that budget.
Yep.
And basically just spend a summer in that area, knock a whole bunch of work out, and then presumably be done with that little quadrant, for the foreseeable future.
Thank you.
I got a question on if we were to get an estimate maybe on what it would cost to do the short-term fixes. I think to your point, Ray, even though it might take a couple of years and we might be at 7 million, it might be 8 million when we're all said and done. If you look at, the cost of doing any additional remediation to that part of the road. But I think part of what I want to know is like, how much should we be setting aside if we go down that road, and no pun intended, but we have to consider making immediate repairs just to keep the road somewhat reasonably passable. Because again, the full picture is, we want to do it right once and do it only once. If we start getting into a cycle of fix and repair consistently, then, do people then decide like that's adequate? And that's not the good long-term, in my opinion, solution of use of tax money on something that constantly needs repair, where we can look at it and fix it all at once, even though it's going to take a couple of years. So getting that estimate on just what they would need to maybe fix certain areas and what that would take.
I can certainly reach out to Paul and Brian on that tomorrow and see what we have for thoughts of that north of Stowe Road area. Because I agree with Ray. I had gone down it a couple of times, not with my wife, but just back and forth, and it is pretty. That's definitely the area that's deteriorating the most rapidly.
I have another question, if I may. If we do an emergency fix option while we wait for the actual fix, is that something we can use the road stabilization fund for, depending on the cost?
Yes.
Yeah, as long as it's not allocated as long as not all the money is allocated, that's the thing. I mean, the other thing that we need to think about too is if, it's 5 million now, it could be 7 million, it could be 6 million. We also have to pay for this somehow. And before we get into, final designs and things like that, we really need to come up with how we're gonna pay for this.
Mhm.
And I have to relate it to, if you're gonna pay $5, $6, or $7 million, the police station cost us $6 million, the fire station cost us $6 million, and now we're talking about doing a road over that's gonna cost us $5 or $6 million. So we really need to think about how we're gonna pay for this also. So, I don't know if Evan, and it's not out yet and it's not approved yet, but or finalized, is the infrastructure bill, and whether we could get some money out of that. We don't know that yet, but
Right.
that's possible.
Yep, that's definitely possible. Something we're watching pretty closely, although it's just going through now.
Yep.
How accurate is that $5 million number? Could we do the design and find out immediately that it's a $7 million project?
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's always a risk. I mean, we're judging this based upon past practice and other projects we've done, and prior expertise. But that could always be the case. I mean, it could be less too. Generally isn't, but it could be.
So Evan, I think I'd like some information on, and maybe this is from DPW advisory, just, the team that looks at the condition of the roads overall makes the recommendations
Yep.
on a year-to-year basis on which roads we should tackle. I'd like some input from them in terms of, because paying for this is going to be a big decision on this board's part. It is a single road. If we're going to bond it, inside or outside 2.5, that's a relatively big decision. I'm very interested in making sure that whatever funding decision we make for this road is a funding decision that we can make for all of the roads in Grafton, so that our funding for the roads is sustainable over time. Because if we're going to be funding inside 2.5, right, and then that's going to impact for, I don't know, 10 to 20 years, the rest of the roads that we can do, are there additional roads in Grafton that are going to have that kind of price tag in the next 10 years that will necessarily dictate that we can't use that approach across the board, and then we should be looking at a debt exclusion. So, you know, I'm very much interested in how George Hill got to where it is today. Was it their intention that, you know, this would happen and we were going to do a debt exclusion at, you know, at some point, and the next one's not going to happen for 15 years, or, you know, what kind of, where are we at with that? To try to have a consistent approach to all the roads.
Understood. I can certainly, again, I can have that conversation with Paul. I have been reviewing our asphalt management plan. It is a pretty good plan, a good document. I don't think that it's very unique for a community to run up against a project like this. And I know this isn't people's favorite thing to hear, but it's not the most heavily traveled road in Grafton.
Yep.
And so when you get a price tag like that, it's not uncommon for these things to get pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed. And I think you see that all over the Commonwealth. It doesn't mean that that's a good practice or the right thing to do, but it's kind of the reality of municipal government and our, you know, ever shrinking budget. So, you know, I don't think that in reviewing this issue, I don't find anything where we've done anything, you know, that really is a huge misstep. I think it's just such a daunting task because of that price tag that, you know, when you look at how many lane miles you can do of a road that doesn't require this type of infrastructure, you know, those other roads look more attractive. And so we need to correct that at this point.
Yeah, no, I get that. But you know, I live right down the street from Estabrook, and that's a road that's come up in the select board context over the last year and a half. And the commentary was, it's not very highly traveled. It's not likely that we're going to actually ever really fix that road. But we understand the safety concern in this particular issue, and they did some you know, emergency repair there. With, you know, so. But my question is, I guess, you know, what's the next George Hill Road?
Yeah.
When's it coming? Because yeah, I totally understand that you've got to keep your pavement condition in all of your roads to a certain level to be able to maintain the whole thing long term, and that necessarily means, because we have budget constraints, that you can't do every single road when they need to be done. But are there any other big price tag roads coming up in the next 10 years where we should be concerned about doing a bond inside 2.5? That I guess that's
Right.
really the
Yep.
single question for me, so that we can decide how to pay for this. It obviously needs to be done, and I'm also interested in understanding what the short-term fix cost would look like.
Understood. I will work on that with Mr. Knoyer.
Any other questions or comments from the board?
How soon would we have to decide about getting something on the warrant? I mean, realistically, we have a lot of time for that, right?
Not really.
Right.
No,
It's-
yeah, it's,
October's right around the corner.
I know.
It's a good point.
Comes so quickly.
Yep.
So-
We always say this
so
about
we're-
this time, and it's like, oh my God, we need to get this done soon. Like, so, go
So
ahead, Evan.
our intention is to ask the board to open the warrant, I think on, and Will, correct me if I'm wrong. I believe we're talking presumptively about August 17th and then closing it on the 21st of September.
That sounds right to me.
Okay,
This week, next week.
maybe next week. Yep.
That's just to open, you know?
Yep. Okay. Any other? I think we covered quite a bit. We talked about funding. We talked about short-term repair. We talked about future planning. Is there anything else that the board feels it needs to discuss tonight with Evan and the rest of us on George Hill Road? Okay. All All right. So next up, I put this on here as we're coming up to Evan's been here for 6 months, and part of our contract with Evan was to do a 180-day evaluation. His 180 days doesn't come up until later this month, but I wanted to have this opportunity with the board just to make sure that all of you've got copies of his, entrance plan. If you don't have a copy of that,
Yeah, I didn't get one.
okay, this is why we're having this meeting. So if we could get a copy out to Ray on that, Evan, that'd be great. So part of this is just an informal review process. This evaluation has nothing tied to any type of raises. It's not really tied to his contract. It's just something we said, hey, are we on track with things? If not, then this gives Evan an opportunity to address those with us. So I wanted to ask the board, like, how does it want to go about computing this? Does it want to do some sort of formalized rubric or we have, graph where we can, lay out what he had in his entrance plan and just kind of, determine and grade like 1 through 5 or whatever, and that sort of thing. But I just wanted to open it up. I don't have any set way of doing this, but this is really our evaluation, not just mine personally. So does anyone have any ideas or thoughts behind it?
I don't have any set ways, but I don't know what a rubric is, so.
leftover from my super formal days on school board. My bad.
geez.
Is his entrance
It's
plan
easy
the
to-
90-day thing? Is that what
Yes.
you,
Yes,
okay.
yeah.
Mhm.
All right.
Yes.
I have just a couple comments that might be good for the board, but also good for Evan too. So as we put together, and I don't know exactly what this looks like, but if we put together sort of an overview based on that 90 days, right? And then what the goals are, and then maybe look at whether we weigh them 1 to 5 or something. We have the good qualities and then maybe challenges. And it's not necessarily maybe challenges with Evan, but just challenges in general that, we can communicate to sort of realize like, oh, this would be difficult for him to achieve, or, this would be easy for him to achieve, and just kind of be able to communicate both those categories openly.
Anybody have any?
I mean, I just think it should be very, very informal. I think that Evan should, discuss what has taken place in the last 180 days and what he's done and what his plans are. And I think we just comment on those and not make it a formal
Okay.
evaluation.
Okay.
Really doesn't, because it's not, we're not gonna document this thing, I'm assuming.
No, it's
Right.
it's.
I don't know.
Everything we do in open session is documented.
Well, yeah,
Yeah,
well, I
yeah.
know that,
So,
I know that.
yeah.
I'm just saying,
Yeah, but if
you
it
know.
came back terrible, it wouldn't go against.
Evan, tell us
Right.
what you did right, tell us what you did wrong, and then we'll tell you what we believe. It's as simple as that, right?
Everything and nothing.
There you
Done.
go.
Yeah.
We're done.
So I wanted the board to again, look over that, entry plan. What I'm thinking is that I will take, any input, obviously, what we decide tonight, just from a timing perspective. I should have mentioned this earlier. I would collect all of that information and have it back to me no later by August 31st, which is 3 weeks from today, and then we would have this as an agenda item on September 7th, and give we would have that informal feedback with the TA. It is also my intention, as part of the evaluation, I can go into this in a future meeting in September, but codifying the board's timeline on when we owe the TA an evaluation. It seems to have gone all over the place. Some years it wasn't done. I think this is something that we really need to get a good hold of in practice. And if anyone agrees or disagrees, or we can have that discussion in September, but it will kind of sort of tie into having this open communication and this dialogue with our TA from now in the future. Doreen?
Can I add to that? So I feel like I agree with Ray in the sense that it should be informal. It's 180 days, it should be informal. But I feel strongly that we should have something in writing to document that we've gone through this process. It doesn't have to be
Yeah, that's fine with me.
super formal, something that can go to HR. I would anticipate it being extremely positive, and I think that should go on record from this board. So I just want to highlight that I would like to put something in writing, whether it's again, a scale approach or something like that. It doesn't have to be a long documentation, but just something that we can add to the file.
I agree totally with that. I think we owe that to Evan. And I think we owe it to ourselves, and it also can sort of be a lighter version of something that we can evolve over time. This is one of the most important things I think this board does, is to evaluate, the performance of the town administrator and give him direction in terms of what our priorities are, and keep reinforcing, making sure that what he's doing is aligned with, what our expectations are. So
Agreed.
I'd like to see some light documentation as well. Doreen, you sent out an eval form from Sutton, so maybe we could use that as the basis.
Yeah.
It's pretty high level, which I think at this stage is kind of what we want.
Yeah.
So, but I'd definitely be in favor of some documentation, a simple rating system.
No, I like it.
Okay.
So we're just gonna use the Sutton template that Doreen sent out, get it to you by August 31st?
That sounds about right.
Okay.
Can we have staff make it into a Grafton document?
I don't see why not.
Yeah.
You don't wanna leave it at Sutton?
Yeah.
Oh,
Might be a little
I don't want
confusing for
Sutton to
Evan.
take
I don't
Evan.
want Sutton to
Yeah,
take Evan
no way.
either, so.
it might be a bit awkward. I would
Yeah.
agree. Yes. Okay. All right. Yes, please. I would like to see the Grafton branding on the document. That would be great. Thank you, Doreen. All right. So does everyone agree with the timeline and that we'll have it by the end of the 31st? This gives you time to reach out to Evan directly and ask him specific questions about his entry plan based on what we're looking for. And then, like I said, this is very informal, so I don't anticipate spending a lot of time, but we do want to do our due diligence, to your point, Matt, and we owe this to Evan and we owe it to ourselves. So if everyone's good with the timeline. All right. So we'll do that. Evan, I'll start working with you on getting the information disseminated to the rest of the board, making sure everybody's got a copy of the entry plan. Maybe just send it out to the whole board just to, tomorrow morning. That'd be great. Anything
If we
else?
make it informal enough, can we repeat this process with our new fire chief when we onboard them?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that depends on his contract, or if we codify something, formally. I think that falls under us.
Yeah, I think it does.
And I did, one of the reasons I had asked Sutton is because I have a strong chief and it's a town manager, and they do use the same evaluation form.
Perfect.
Not that we have to do what Sutton
Nope.
does, I'm just saying there isn't two over there.
Right.
so.
Oh, that's good to know.
Cool.
Good, okay. Got that as another takeaway. I'm sure we'll be talking about that soon. Yes.
We'll see.
All right. Anything else? All right. So next up on our meeting tonight, Select Board Handbook. So this is something that we've been talking about now for a few meetings. Tonight we've got Colleen's, just her comments on what she would like to see. She put her thoughts on paper and submitted that to us today, and I just put it in the packet for everybody to see. In addition, I just wanted to open this up to the board. Let's just take this time, maybe just review like some of the things we definitely like or things that we need to work on. And I figure if we just kind of go down this template and look at what others have to say, we can just say, does this look good? This is good. If there's other areas that we want to have concerns, then we bring that back to a next meeting and we just address those before we put this out.
And I suggest we do something a little differently. So I appreciate the work that Colleen has done on this. However, it was sent this afternoon and I wasn't able to open it until before the meeting because I was working. And so I went ahead and made notes on what was on the old agenda. So I think we should try to cover both.
Mm-hmm.
I have notes based on the old agenda, and I know there's some that go back and forth, but maybe we could start at one and then move to the other and, just see the select board handbook that's Colleen's as her version to sort of add in.
Mm-hmm.
A little confusing.
No,
but
I totally
just-
agree with that because what we were given was the template Evan gave us, and
Correct.
I lifted heavily from that. But
Yeah.
everybody came prepared with that, so I think that's what we should discuss. This was sent out ahead of time it was 50-50 either send it out ahead of time and confuse everybody, or give it to you last minute and get mad you got it last minute. So we rolled the dice on that one. But I agree. I think we should do.
And I'm certainly not mad. I just it would be hard for me within a 2-hour time period to pull out what was different from the
Yeah,
one
you
I
shouldn't have
reviewed.
to.
Yeah,
That's
so-
going to be what I do when I
okay.
present it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So Peter, how do you want to start? Do you want Colleen to go first, or do you want to use?
I say we just go down the list because Colleen's got her thoughts and she's going to share them. She'll give an opportunity to go over what she's, but this gives us an opportunity to just go over what's in the template, what we'd like to see. If things align with, majority of the board, we'll look at getting that written into the language and then brought back to us at a future date. This is just our discussion to go over. If we need to put things on the table and think about that, then that's our prerogative tonight.
Great.
So we'll go section by section.
Let's go section by section. So,
Of which handbook?
Of Evans.
let's look at the template.
That's what
one.
everybody
Yeah.
had to
Okay.
compare with.
So we're gonna look at the introduction. Anyone have any questions or comments?
There is no introduction on Evans. That's something I added on mine
And why is this in here?
because that's mine.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's in the
have to go in
agenda
the packet.
change.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
You brought a
No
print
worries.
this one. I'm sorry.
Yep.
There we go.
Yep.
Okay.
It's a workshop. We're loose. We're having fun.
This is informal.
So informal and so fun.
It is.
So let's go down. So Colleen wants to introduce an introduction.
Yeah, so when I looked around at other communities that had handbooks, a lot of them had introductions. I mean, they start with a table of contents, then they start with an introduction. I lifted this introduction off of another community. I just thought it was simple, to the point, what this is, what this isn't. This isn't a set in stone, live and die by document. This is just to provide guidance when you're, what do we do? What should we do? This hasn't come up before, and, but yeah. So that's what I wanted to do that. When we talked about this at our last workshop, it was mentioned that it was going to be, just to provide guidance. So the introduction helps to introduce that.
I
How does
like
everybody
it.
feel about it?
I like it. I would also say we should put somewhere like maybe under the introduction paragraph if it's been amended, because let's assume that this will be amended a lot of times.
On my table
Oh my
contents, I
gosh,
nailed that.
Colleen.
Man, we should have gone over table contents a little more. Sorry about that. But yeah, I have that in there because
Okay,
that's
great.
important.
Yeah. Not even on that page yet.
I've had fun this week. If you can't tell,
Yeah, I can.
it was a good time.
So we're looking at amending, adding like a version history with dates.
Well, right here.
Yeah. But I would put,
Yeah, but I would-
revise and
I would do it after each section.
exactly.
Oh, sure.
Take that and put it after introduction and just put it down there. When was that last revised? Yeah. Anyone else have any questions or comments on that? Does anyone have any objections? Or
I'm fine with the
feedback?
introduction.
Okay. What's next?
So the next thing, I guess we're kind of going over mine instead of Evans, but I did adding a little history, just a little blurb of the history of the Grafton Select Board. Maybe reach out to the Historic Commission to draft something. I saw that in a lot of other communities. I liked it. Something else I also saw was a list of every select board member that's ever served in a community. Some dated back as far as 1700s. This is an example from, I think it was Bedford I threw in here just so you guys get an idea of what I'm thinking. I spent a better part of today going through 1729 to 1979 of the select board members that have served in Grafton. So I have that first 150 years covered. It's gonna be that last 140 that I'm gonna have to do a little more digging on, but I think it's something I can put together, and I think it would be pretty cool to have. But thoughts?
I like it. I like the list of select board members, and when I did skim this earlier, I was like, how do I not know any of these people?
'Cause
And then
they-
I realized
No,
that this
Colleen,
was,
I'm sitting here looking for my name.
yeah.
You know,
It does go back
who is
from
this?
89, yeah.
I'm like, who are these people?
No, it was just I didn't have time to get it in for the packet, but I wanted to give an example of what my vision was, so that's why I included that. And maybe including the list of town managers or town administrators that we've had, just as acknowledgement, and it's a nice, we're handing this off to each new member and welcome, and this is what we do.
So to me, that doesn't belong in a policy document. I like the information, but having a history of every select board member as a part of a policy,
It's not a policy though; it's just a handbook.
Just a handbook.
okay.
Well, so can I jump in? Because there's two different things we're discussing here, right? So Colleen's creating a handbook. I gave you rules of procedure. They're different things in the end, right? So rules of procedure gives you a policy directive that each member of the select board agrees to follow. Right? How you will contact staff, how you'll interact with the public, things like that. An employee, a select board handbook goes farther than that and gives history, background, guidance doc, those types of things. So they are a little bit different, depending on how you're interpreting the word handbook versus, the policy that we were talking about before.
So I guess we probably all should agree on what it is we're trying to accomplish here. I was under the assumption we were making a handbook, so I could be wrong.
I was too. And I hear Matt's point, but I will say I feel like the value of having the select board list is, let's say it's 20 years from now and decisions were made and amended in this document, that you could go back and be like, oh, Doreen DeFazio, Colleen Roy, Peter Carlson, they made this amendment. You know what I mean? So it's sort of a reference point that is in the same document, and I kind of like that.
Sure, I guess I was thinking of it more as a policy document than
Okay.
than a handbook. I'm not super passionate about it either way. If we're gonna put like a wrapper around our like working procedures, that's okay. I just feel like we've got so much work to do that maybe if we started with something that was a smaller, simpler thing, then we could add on to it later on. To just try to get through some of this stuff. I love a lot of the language that I'm seeing, and I'm really psyched to see it actually documented and on paper. So, but it feels to me much more of a procedural document than a handbook.
So that would have more teeth than just guidance. That's something that we need to follow
Yes.
a lot more, and I think that's different too, because I think it's been presented as, at the previous meetings, that this is a handbook, as guidance, but if we want to pivot and change directions, I'm all for that, but I would be viewing it differently, because then it would be no longer just guidance. This is something that we must follow, and there'd be, I would assume, repercussions for not following it. I don't know if we all agreed to that.
Well, may I speak, Peter? Do you mind? I did bring it up in the context of it being policy driven, because we were working on policies, and that's why I brought it back onto the agenda, because I was, and I also think that it is a very important document to have in order for us to get through all the work that we have on our plates and make sure that we're all rowing in the same direction, and we have policies that we can look back on, we can agree on, and we can say, okay, so now we know, Evan's responsible for this, the board is responsible for this, we all understand, how things are going to go, so we can just full steam ahead on all the work that needs to be done. However, I called it a handbook. And so it's my, I didn't call it policies and procedures, because a year and a half ago when Donna Stock brought it before the board, she also referred to it as a handbook, and I did. So, yeah, I think we have a decision to make as a board, is what are we looking for and what is the value here? And I would agree with Matt and say that the value here is to put some policy and procedures in place for us to follow, and not just a loose guidance.
But that's what we're doing now with all of the policy and procedures that we're reviewing each week and coming forth. Like just on July 20th, we just passed an agenda policy. So if you really need a hard and fast rule, you go to that policy.
Right.
But if you're looking for guidance because you're new on the board, that's what this handbook is for. If this is just a policy, another type of policy for our policies, it seems redundant to me. We have
That's not what it is, though.
Okay.
If I go in, so rules of procedure, like I had given you as a template, lays out how you expect that your membership will operate and will adhere to a certain set of guidelines or rules. So it is the policy, as I had talked about before, making it policy number 1. This is where you start in the policy manual, because it lays out for you as a board how you expect everyone will operate. And it does give you, I guess, some teeth if you have a member that won't adhere to the guidelines that you've all agreed are important. there's no real enforcement mechanism, of course, because they're all duly elected people.
Right.
So there's only one real mechanism. But the handbook route, if you look at other towns that do the handbook route, a lot of times they're softer in that they're a teaching document for a new member. And so really what that is that you're coming into the board, you're green as a select board member. Here's a book that helps lay out what it means to be a select board member in Grafton. The policy side of it is the rules of procedure that says that's great, but here's how we expect that we are all going to act, or here's how we expect certain things to be done in a certain way, to keep things consistent and open, transparent, honest, and to give your membership some accountability for those off chances that you may need that, or a document policy to go back and point to and say, no, we all agreed that this is how we're going to do it, and it's not appropriate to do it any other way.
So this is a combined document,
It is.
correct?
It is, because it's based off of what Evan gave us, and I just picked out the things and edited it the way I preferred it to see it, and I added things like the history, the introduction, the table of contents, which apparently, so yes, it's a hybrid of that.
Yeah, so in my previous role, we had a handbook for new members to come on board, just like a guidance and a mapping of who to reach out to, who to contact, how to do this, how to do that. Sometimes with new members who don't know how to do that, that can be very intimidating. Sometimes you don't feel like you want to ask another member for that advice, like who do I contact for this sort of thing. So having that document, having that handbook is good. I would say that there should be references in the handbook with regards to procedural matters of the board, which are the policies, which we're also doing in each one of the meetings. So I do believe we could have two. If it's my understanding, I'm trying to kind of move this along a little bit, but is it my understanding that the board wants to see like meeting procedure, agenda procedure, notice of public hearings, decisions, and those items kind of moved more to the rules and procedures policy, and that the handbook really focus on just an introduction to who we are, the history of us, the roles of the select board, our select board code of conduct, interactions with the town administrator and department heads, and then additional resources in the appendix. I mean, is that what I'm hearing? Or am I hearing that we want to take everything in the rules and procedures, move it into one document?
Now, you need two different documents. The way it's being
I think you do
explained, you
too.
need two
Yes.
different documents.
Yeah.
So, one is, like you said, Peter, one is, you hand it to the new guy who came in, or girl, whatever, person. I'll get it. And you say, okay, here's what it is. This is, we can go through the whole thing. And then you actually have your procedures and the rules that you follow in another document. So it's really two separate documents.
I agree with that.
I mean, what you've got in here, Colleen, with all the names, the introduction, all the names of people and stuff like that. I mean, people could look at that online and, get some history out of it and stuff like that. I think that's a great start to a handbook. I think, stuff like that. But then when you get to the rules and regulations, it's a totally different document.
That's fine.
So, before we go further down in the role of select board and so on and so forth, in code of conduct, does everyone agree, just by looking at the table of contents that Colleen had produced, that meeting procedure, agenda procedure, notice of public hearings and decisions should be kind of in a separate document? Or do people believe that should be in the handbook?
No,
I imagine code of conduct and roles of the select board it would all be in the procedure, right? Like honestly, the fluff is what you guys want to take out, and that's fine if you're not into it, because the rest of it's the document Evan gave us.
Well, the code of conduct,
So what the code
Is,
of conduct is the I just renamed it authority and structure of the select board. Or no, I renamed certain things, but I used the same information. I just called it instead of internal operations member interaction, I said code of conduct, because that made sense to me. But if it doesn't make sense to everybody, call it internal operations member interaction.
Anybody else?
So, what are we doing tonight? Are we putting the handbook aside and are we just working on the policies and procedures?
I think if we decide on this right here, then we know what the contents of a handbook may look like. So the framework of a handbook could be completed, and we know that we've got a rules and procedure, in front of us that Evan had given us. So I guess if
So-
everyone's in agreement that of the 5 components that I mentioned should be stricken out of there, and then in addition to if select board code of conduct, to your point, all you did was rename that.
Well, so I went through here and I married stuff together. So I would have to go through and tell you guys what you did. I imagine you all came up with your own versions of what you liked and didn't like as well, and that's what we're here tonight. So going section by section is probably the best way to go forward. Section by section of the one Evan provided, not the one you have in front of you.
Well, I'm almost 2/3 of the way through this table of contents, I guess is what I'm getting at. That's what I was trying to figure out. Just for the sake of argument and the time that we've spent, do we want to continue talking about the handbook, I guess, or do we want to just focus on the rules and procedures?
Well, why don't we determine what's gonna be in the handbook and what's gonna be in the, rules and procedures? And start there.
That's
So,
where we're at. So we've got introduction and history, like we talked about that.
Yeah.
Right, and we've got clarification on that, we've all had some input on that. Now we're getting into the roles of the select board, and that's where this kind of question came up about, are there things that belong in a policy document or things that belong in more of an introductory handbook?
So, here's what I'd suggest. I think that what Colleen just said is every other part, she's renamed some and married some things together, but it's essentially everything from Evan's document. Why don't we take the ideas that she's added for the handbook as a start, put that off to another meeting, go back, look at the MMA handbook, kind of try to localize that to Grafton. Yes.
But that's basic.
Yes. And sort of rework that separately, because I think we're all in agreement that the policies and procedures we all have input on tonight, and the handbook is maybe less important at this time as well, and we can just sort of put it off for another workshop.
Okay. All right, so we'll focus on the rules and procedures without any objection?
Yep.
And we'll move the handbook to a future meeting?
Sure.
Okay.
Sounds good.
All right. All right, so let's start at the top here, procedural matters. Let's start with number 1. Anyone have any comments, questions?
where are you, Peter? I'm sorry.
I am on I'm on the document that, Evan sent out.
Oh, okay.
Let me see if I can pull up the date.
So number 1's authority and structure.
So, there's under the position of chair generally rotates around the 3 members, or 5 for us, of the board on an annual basis, with the vice chair first in line to assume the position of chair next year. I want to keep just the part that says the position of chair generally rotates around the 5 members on the board. I don't like the idea that it's setting any one member up that they're going to be chair next year, because that's what that does, saying that.
I agree.
Me too. William's got it, right?
So if you, but that's not the section we're in. We're in section 1, authority
yeah.
and structure of the select
All right,
board.
I'm looking at the wrong, because I'm looking at a different document.
Yeah.
1 second, I gotta pull up the right one. Go ahead and continue speaking. Someone that's-
Yeah, did anybody else see anything in that section that stood out to them, or,
I mean, I didn't love that statement in general, because I've never believed in the rotation idea, but, it says generally rotates, so it's not, this isn't a hard and fast thing, so I'm okay with it.
But you're suggesting, Colleen, just taking out that sentence, right?
no, not the whole sentence, just the last part that
Last part.
sets up the
Yep.
vice chair. But I think it should say that the position generally rotates around the 5 members of the board on
Yep.
an annual basis, because,
Got it. Okay.
that was what was in there.
That sounds good to me.
Okay, I have some highlights on responsibilities of the chair. And I'm, number 2, sign official documents that require signature of the chief elected officer. Shouldn't that say, as authorized by the board? Because the chairman can't sign anything unless it's authorized by the board.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So that should say as authorized by the board. And then we go down to, number 5, represent the board at meetings, conferences, and other gatherings as authorized by the board.
I would be cautious about adding as authorized by the board then, because if you, like, let's take India Day, if Peter was gonna go and speak on your behalf, do you all wanna have to vote that Peter can go and speak as the chair of the select board?
Well, no, this says represent the board at meetings,
But that-
conferences, and other gatherings. Then if that's, if we're talking about, you know, India Day or something like that, that's a different situation. I mean, anybody could have gone to that. Peter went, and that was great. And you know, I just don't believe that the chairman of the board of the selectmen or select board represents the board at meetings and conferences in other, unless the board authorizes them to do that. It would be actually no different than if somebody said, you know, the board authorizes Matt, you know, to represent us at an MMA meeting. You know, I just think that I think that the role of chairman is to put together the agenda with the town administrator and to run the meeting. That's it. It ends there, other than being known as the chairman of the board. As a matter of fact, you know, go to the next one, act as spokesperson for the board with the press. Serve as spokesperson of the board at town meetings. No. The chairman is not the spokesperson of the board at town meetings. Every member of the board can speak and say whatever they want. The
So-
one person is not the spokesperson.
So I think with the press, it's important to have someone designated. You don't
So-
want.
Well, if you have a chief information officer, but that would normally be.
But you don't want all of your board members all speaking.
Oh, no.
To the press.
No.
Independently.
Oh, no, absolutely not. I'm not saying that, but do we need to put that down as act as spokesperson with the board, with the press? Does that even need to be in there?
I think it's important. So
There-
that in particular was one that I looked at and was kind of, I said, yes, all day long.
There are times when the press is asking the town and so on and so forth, and, you know, working with staff and town administration would generate a press release and a press statement, you know, that would go out. And, you know, typically you would see the chair being the person who issued the statement, but not represent and do a Q&A.
But that statement would come before the members prior to it going out.
No.
Not necessarily.
So let me play devil's advocate. 20 years from now, you get some knucklehead who's chairman, and I'm not saying, Peter, that's you. I'm just saying,
20 years from now, Peter. It's not
20
right
years
now.
from now.
I thought he was going to say 2 months from now,
You know,
so
I
I'm
feel
off
like-
the hook.
I feel like I'm on, I feel like I'm on laughing, you know, the news of the future. But 20 years from now, you get some knucklehead who's the chairman, and we've had knuckleheads as chairman. We have. You know, I just think that to act as spokesperson to the press, to represent the entire board without the entire board knowing what's going on, is pretty out there. I don't know.
Usually those events constitute an emergency. Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
And typically in those emergency situations, like there's a natural disaster or there's some pending something that has to occur,
Right.
some news that has to get disseminated out in a very rapid. It is not uncommon for a select board to hold an emergency meeting to have that type of discussion and then have input into that and then make a decision, and then the chair would go out on behalf of the town, and if it's authorized,
Correct.
they're authorized. To your point, if the chair proves to be incompetent, from the majority of the members, and it wants its vice chair, somebody else, or the TA, then that's its decision and its choice that it should be able to make at that point in time. But I do agree with you that, going out free willy-nilly and speaking to the press without, and saying, I speak for the board, is something that I don't stand for,
But keep in mind, Peter,
unless
that
you're authorized.
also people, the chairman of the board position in some people's minds, in a lot of people's minds, is elevated to this,
Yeah.
to this position where they think that whatever this person says is the rest of the board is saying. So I'm not sure how you get around that.
So here's another
But-
press example. We got an email asking if we're going to have any 9/11 events because the press is writing an article about that. Has anybody responded? Are you responsible for responding? And would you tell us what your response is prior to responding? It doesn't necessarily need to be a catastrophic event for press to require a response, and that's a great one.
Right.
That was a request that came in through the select board's general email account.
It's press, your chair, so under this, you're responsible for responding.
Yeah, I think there has to be
When-
some sort of delineation on just appropriateness of a response. The answer to the question is, the chief of police has already announced that they're not having, but I didn't have to make that response.
Right, but I guess if act as a spokesperson for the press in urgent matters, where that now it really resolves to that's what it's for, and it's not for the mundane press requests of are we doing any celebrations or memorials?
Yeah, and urgent
So-
matters, absolutely.
So-
Somebody's gotta be the chief,
Can,
chief information officer.
can I say something really quick? So we need some sort of representation of the board to speak out for the press. And so we have to determine, is that going to be the chairperson or not? And I also want to point out that we have a communication analyst here, and we can also say that, maybe we can have the chair work directly with staff to make sure that, we're communicated to and we're all comfortable with how we're being represented, if that's what we want to do. But I'm personally in full favor of having the chair always represent the board on the public side when necessary.
I think, and I know this is saying responsibilities of the officers, the chair of the board shall. I think you take this part out, and there's a whole nother section about how to interact with the press. And then in that, I'm sorry, Evan?
No, I'm sorry. I thought there was a natural pause there. Please finish your thought.
It is a natural pause. No.
Okay, sorry.
You made
Now it is,
I
right?
tried to make it natural as
now it's
possible, not
unnatural.
awkward and unnatural.
I was going to play some cricket sounds in between of his natural pause.
We already had that this we don't need to go
So-
any further.
So I just want to offer my opinion on this. So these are not out of place as rule as for the role of the chair. So these are generally thought to be the role. This is generally thought to be the role of the chair in the state of Massachusetts. So I didn't hand write these. This is pretty much how the chair is supposed to operate. And so when you have a chair on a board, when the press calls and says, why did the select board, or what was the select board's decision? You need a person from the board that can answer that without having to call a meeting and decide who's going to answer it and exactly what they're going to say, which is generally the role of the chair. Now, I serve as the PIO for the town for most things, but there are times in which the press does not want to talk to the town administrator. They want to talk to the chief elected official, which in this case would be the chair of the select board. So, these, I get the town meeting, you might want to change that language. I think that the chair of the board should act as the spokesman for the board. They can't talk about things that the board hasn't decided, but when you need someone to respond to the press that wants to talk to a board member, I think you need to have one designated person that's going to do that. As far as represent the board at meetings, conferences, and other gatherings, again, I think that's a pretty straightforward thing. They're not representing the board with things that are, not decided or just doing policy decisions. They're generally the person that is going to show up for different events and say, I'm chair of the select board of the town of Grafton. And this is what we do in Grafton, or whatever it is. That's really all it is. And I don't want, not I don't want, I'm just concerned that we're going way down the rabbit hole for, things that are pretty general in nature with, we're talking about hypotheticals.
I'd agree with that, and I think, this and future boards have to have some level of trust with the chair that they've elected, that they voted to put in that position, and it's, you might have a knucklehead someday, but, that would be a poor decision by that board, and they'd have to live with that decision. If you send somebody to the India Day celebration and they say something inappropriate, maybe you've made a bad decision,
At the end of the day, this is just guidance as well. It's not super enforceable.
Right, this isn't a bylaw.
Right,
No.
right.
So it's just, it's.
So I just wanted to bring it up. I brought it up.
I agree with the town
I think
meeting.
the town meetings-
I have a concern about that one, too.
That should just go away.
I think so, too.
Okay.
All right, anything else under responsibilities of the chair? I do have one question. Speak to town councils on legal matters in the absence of the town administrator who serves are the board designee. Does anybody have any input on that? I kind of feel that if the chair's talking to legal counsel, in my opinion, then there should be a meeting and the board should be aware that that conversation is occurring.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So I have an example for, like, when we were talking about the HCs, I had a question and, I ran it through Evan, like, are we legally allowed to do it? It wasn't anything, it was just more of a fact finding, is that legal kind of a question. If Evan was on vacation, I would run it through you to find that out for me, so we would have that information when we get into the meeting rather than getting permission to get that information and just delay everything. It's not necessarily to have, huge in-depth conversations. I read it as for fact-finding information.
Okay.
Right, and it's only in my absence or the TA's absence. So it doesn't change our general or our policy now where, I oversee all the conversations with council unless they have to do with me, obviously. But that, you're right, I'm in San Diego and something comes up with an HCA and you need to answer a question, people should go through the chair to make sure that we're not frivolously using counsel.
Well, in that situation, Evan, you're going to have a designee that's acting as TA in your absence. The board is going to be aware of that.
But probably, well, I don't think I would. So, I would delegate financial responsibilities to Mary and some operational stuff to William, but I don't know that we've really fleshed out that, William's gonna, what that role looks like.
So in our provisions in our charter, we do allow for acting TA, but the only person who can designate the acting TA is the town administrator.
Right.
Right. So, in the powers and duties are free to you, like you're right, to your point, and I don't want to beat this any more than we have to, but just so everyone's aware that, it's a very rare circumstance that we are without that person in town hall that can't facilitate or be out of contact, right? So maybe this is one of those rare things that I'm trying to just make sure we understand what we're deciding on here tonight, but I just want to make sure we talk about it and we don't gloss over it. Okay. All right, move on.
Section 2.
I'm just reading the rest of this. Okay, yep. Internal operations, interaction with the public. All right. Moving on to internal operations with the town administrator and department heads. Any question on,
I have a couple
Okay.
for part 3.
let's just we'll go through, part 3 or A, B, and C, or just starting
Um,
with the paragraph under part 3?
Yeah, A, B, and C were okay to me. I put annual goals meeting as one of them. I think that's on. That might be down on 4. Can't find it right now. But anyway, I just think that under internal operations with town administrator and department heads, I just wanted to highlight more the importance of us continuing to have annual goals meetings and what the result of those goals meetings are and when they're being reviewed and by whom. And so, you know, typically what we found is goals can often be action items to departments that will be managed through the TA, and, you know, Evan will be the one giving us updates and timelines of when they will be done. So I just don't know if we should move from wherever the section is of goals, and it was kind of vague, to maybe adding a line in there somewhere that, like, kind of to Matt's point earlier, it's like, you know, it's up to us to evaluate the town administrator based on, you know, policies and procedures that we're doing and giving to him and then the rest of the department heads. And where do those come from? Well, not only meetings, but really our overall arching goals of the year as well. So I feel like that would be a good thing to highlight and have more of a process in place for that.
So where would you want to include that process?
Under number 3, anywhere we can add, how far does it go down? E, so we
Goes
can
to
add an F.
F.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
And just, you know, put that in as a reminder, as, like, you know, one of the responsibilities internally for the town administrator is to be reviewing the board's goals with the department heads responsible for it and coming back to us with execution, timeline, issues, whatever it is, on a regular basis,
Do you wanna-
quarterly basis, or whatever we decide.
Do you want to come back with maybe some sample language?
Yeah,
We
I'm
can
happy
kinda
to do
put,
that.
We could put section 3,
Section F
potential F on hold.
Yep.
As to, we'll see how that plays out in,
Okay.
Okay.
And then my next, it's really just an overall question for the board. When I read D, navigating complaints from residents. So, you know, we all know that we see all the emails that come in, and it says here, town administrator and or department head will deal with any complaint or concern raised by a resident having to do with town hall or a respective department. Members of the board shall forward complaints received directly from residents to the town administrator. So I put, complaints are managed to the TA. Do we not respond? And what about social media complaints? Like, what's our policy? How do we handle, you know, like, do we address it or not? Because I mean, I know for me, there's been emails that come through, and I feel like I want to respond to people sometimes and just give my opinion on it, or, you know, feedback on it. But if we're going to have 5, 6 people, meaning, you know, also the TA, is that not the way we're supposed to do it? And so I'm always confused, like, when we get emails, should I be responding or should I not be responding? And I guess that's what it comes down to. And then to bring it greater, like, you know, Colleen or Peter may see a complaint that's on, you know, like with the rug, the carpeting at the library. Like, that's turned into something that is an issue that we're facing and dealing with now, and that came from social media. So is the board not supposed to respond to things? Are we supposed to forward everything to you? And do we agree to that, or do we want to change it to something else?
I like the idea of forwarding everything to the town administrator, and the reason that is for example, when you brought up the complaints you've been hearing about the sunflower shanty, you'd received complaints nobody else on the board had, so it was hard to know how to weigh that, like, who did the complaint come from?
Right.
And by forwarding it to the town administrator, let them filter it out, rather than it's just someone said something and they go into these nameless complaints. I like the idea of forwarding things to the town administrator. As far as social media, that's a different brand of complaint, right? Like, if somebody's sending you a private message, then yeah, that counts. Forward that on. But if you're reading things in the general comments section, that's not really, I think, any of us to take ownership on, because that's just general comments for anybody to read.
See, I think there's a process for people to complain or send complaints, which they've done many times, and you do it right on on the town's website. You know, social media is another situation where, you know, again, I'm not on it, so I know people complain all the time. Do I take that as legitimate? No, I don't. I'm sorry, I don't, you know, but I think that if someone, you know, complains and you know that person, you should be able to respond to them and say, hey, you know, what's the deal? What's going on? You know, what's happening here? You know? And I'll take the you know, the train horn that blew 40 times between 7 a.m. and 9 a.m. I know the people. I would feel bad if I did not contact them and say, hey, you know, I'll listen. What, you know, what's the issue? So,
But they went through the formal process, so we were all looped in. I think
Yes,
I'm talking
they did,
about
yeah.
people who, when it gets brought up in open session and we're all kind of sidelined by a complaint that none of us saw. I don't want to do
Oh.
that anymore.
So-
It's got to be through a formal process, or don't bring it up.
Right. So
I totally agree.
so if
Yeah.
someone,
Yeah.
you know, so if someone calls me and says, "Hey, I don't like, you know, I don't like this. I don't like
Direct
the
them
music,"
how to
right?
do it appropriately.
Then I say, send an email.
Right,
And,
and
they
then-
say, I'm not sending an email. I'm telling you. You're a board member. I'm telling you.
And
It's
you're
like,
telling them their solution.
Yeah.
And then I can't advocate for you.
Yeah.
You need to advocate for
But we
yourself.
have
a process.
Yeah.
So, you know, and I want to weigh in this too. What I've seen have happened in other boards and committees is a member would, through proxy, through a complaint, saying, I talked to multiple people about such and such, such
Yeah,
and such.
yeah.
Evan, you need to go and fix this. But the board doesn't know anything about
Right.
the context,
Oh,
couldn't
yeah.
ask questions, but to your point, to Mr. Paglioni, we all had an opportunity to reach out and talk to him about that one. And what happens is that by proxy, one person's making a decision for the board because I'm justifying it by saying,
I heard it from a ton of people.
I heard it from a ton of people.
So we got to do something.
It could be one person,
Right,
but I heard it from a ton of
because
people.
it's-
Right, right,
yeah.
right.
So that's gonna. I like the idea that clears this up.
Yeah, and here's another part of this. If there is a complaint that the board needs to take under consideration in a future meeting, it should be through Evan as well. Like, I think the members should reach out to Evan and say, you know, Evan, I think we need to reach out to this a little bit more. We're not there yet, but, you know, this might be something that might have to come up on the meeting. You know, this is going to a staff member. They're looking at this from a town department perspective. And then, you know, if they feel that it needs to bubble up to us, okay, then that gets referred through the agenda process. It might take a little while, but that way there's more of like a, I don't want to call it this, but an equitable way of dealing with complaints, and everyone and everything's being treated equally the same. Whether you get them through social media, you get them through a phone call, you get them through email.
Right. Nobody should get special treatment because they made it into my contact list on my phone. You know what I mean? Like, you got to do the same thing everybody else does, and that's how we get
Yep.
fair treatment.
So I do like this part of the document. I definitely noted, like Doreen, that we've been a little bit inconsistent in the way that we've dealt with those things. I think everything should go to the town administrator for sure, but Ray, to your point, you know, somebody reaches out to me, or if I know somebody, if I think that I've got an opinion on something that is valuable to that person, or, you know, I think we should all feel free to reach out to that person. My only concern in that model, I guess, is that potentially we wouldn't all be on the same page in terms of what we're telling them. So I like what you've been doing, which is just, hey, I reached out to this person, just so that we all kind of know, because Doreen, I've had the same question. Do I reach out to this person? I recognize that's a valid complaint. I have an opinion about it, but that person probably doesn't want 5 board members with
Right.
5 different things to say.
Right.
So yeah, just I think if we all give each other a heads up when we're going to be reaching out to somebody, that's probably fine.
So a lot of the times too, staff reaches out to these people. I think
Right.
we need to get looped in on that, because that's what I usually do. If something strikes me as, did anyone deal with this? I forward it on to this gentleman who's very excited about it, and say, hey, did anybody do anything? Oh yeah, I took care of it this morning, so
Yep.
I don't have to worry about it. But if we got looped into the fact that it was taken care of this morning, or you know, sometimes we do, sometimes we don't, depending on who responded.
Yeah. So Evan, you
Just want to give Evan a chance. He had his hand
Sure.
over once. I'm sorry, Matt.
I just think we should I think we can reasonably draft language that talks about when we receive feedback from a resident, either through my office or through one of you, that, you know, we're going to ensure that everyone else is copied on the response so that everyone is on the same page and we have a coherent response and not, we don't have 5 different responses for the same question. I think we can draft that.
Matt, did you have anything else you want?
That, he just answered my question.
So that was F, looking to add D, we'll make some structural changes, come back and capture the spirit of what we're trying to accomplish. Doreen, did you have anything else? Because you said you had a few.
Not on that section. No.
Okay. Does anyone else have anything under 3?
Actually, I'm sorry, I do. I have one more.
I thought you had 3.
Yeah, so this is pretty easy. It's a yes and no question. So, E, communicating with staff and asking staff to do things. It basically is directing here that everything should go through the TA. So, you know, there are situations where, you know, I'm going to give the example of the Affordable Housing Trust working with Chris McGoldrick, right? And so, you know, there's situations where there are department heads that are working with other committees and probably some board members from time to time. And so I guess I'm just looking for your feedback, Evan, of like what would be best for us to do if I needed to speak to William on something or speak to, you know, Bob on something that, you know, how's the best way for us to keep you in the loop? To tell you and you go to staff, or can we go to staff and tell you, hey, I'm going to go to William and ask this of him? I mean, I guess that's what the communication with staff line is getting at, and I like it because I want to make sure that you're directly and appropriately able to know what your department heads are doing. But if we need to contact them for some reason, what's the best approach that you would like us to take?
Personally, I think that just as long as I am copied or looped in, that generally suffices.
Okay.
And then, you know, if it is inappropriate, then I just tell the board member that how they're interacting with staff is inappropriate. We need to do that differently. And you know, that's kind of on the eaches. I mean, 99.9% of the time, you know, you need to reach out to William to ask him about something that you find as a typo on the website. Like, God, I do not want you to all have to call me to then me go tell William to change a word on the website. That's going to be brutal. I think as long as I get looped in afterwards, and part of that is also my policy with my staff. So the policy with the staff is if they have contact with any of you, that they loop me in on the other side as well. Just say, hey, you know, Matt stopped by to ask about, you know, this typo on the website. I mean, it doesn't go anywhere further than that, but, you know, just making sure that all our communication is covered both ways. So I don't know that we want to make it too complicated as far as, you know, as long as it's just like when I'm responding to residents now, or if one of you ask me for a specific set of data, I'm going to just copy it back out to all of you. Then you all know, and it was done, you know, it's really no more work. You just all have the information that you need. So, does that answer your question, Doreen, or
Yeah,
did I
absolutely.
circle all the way around it and get nowhere?
No, and that should have been a yes, no answer, and I didn't even frame it as that, but I just wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page. That's great. Thank you.
Okay.
Colin, did you have anything under section 3?
Yeah, I guess if we're gonna go to loop back to the navigating complaints, so that, you know, in 20 years from now, to Ray's point, when we have a knucklehead for a chair, maybe putting an example in of what it is that we're trying to accomplish, that, you know, to avoid, I heard from so-and-so, to whatever. Use the example that we're trying to avoid by doing this. Like vague complaints.
Okay.
I think we can reasonably draft some language that'll satisfy all of that discussion,
So do we
or at
consider
least we'll try.
social media vague complaints if they don't go through the process?
Unless the town, and this is just my opinion, unless the town of Grafton has a Facebook page where complaints can be filed, then I don't think that complaints on Facebook or whatever it is should be addressed. I think we need to go through the proper channels to address complaints.
But I think there's two forms of communications on social media, the public and private conversations that are on there. If somebody's contacting you privately, it's no different than them texting you, calling you, stopping you in Stop and Shop. This is what you need to do to be heard. Here's your formal process. You know, I hear what you're saying, but this is what you gotta do if you wanna bring it further. Anything that's said publicly, that's it. They said it publicly. It's there for everybody to read or not read or
But yeah,
whatever
how
they
many,
want.
so if somebody texted me, they're just texting me. They're not texting Matt and you and 5,000 other people that are on my Facebook page.
Before we get a complaint on our town social media page about how long we've been talking about complaints,
know.
let's see what comes back
Yeah.
with some language that kind of captures the genesis. I think we've hit upon, I think, our concerns, unless I'm mistaken. Is there any more exhibits that we need to give the TA?
No, not for me.
Okay.
Nope.
Okay. Anything else, Colleen, under section 3 did you have? I didn't want to move on.
Nope.
Okay. So day-to-day operations, we're good with that?
Oh yeah, I thought we were on to the next section.
Nope.
Day
We
operations.
kind of took things as Doreen kind of took them up at once. So
Oh.
I'm just going through B, Town Administrator's Chief Administrative Officer for the town. That's kind of written in our town charter and bylaws. C, request for information, documents, records, or reports.
Fine with that.
Okay, and we've talked about D in E and looking at adding F. Okay, great. And, okay, so we're on to section 4, internal operation members interaction.
I want to strike D entirely. I think FinCom handles that.
D, you
Yep.
said?
Yep.
On E, fact-finding initiatives by board members must be approved by majority vote of the board. Strike that. You guys, that's all I do, all the time. I go on fact-finding missions. And if I had to get everything approved by you guys, you would not like me.
What number is that, or letter?
That's on E.
E.
Just that last sentence?
Yeah, just the
Colleen?
fact-finding part. The first
Yeah,
part's fine, but I don't. You guys would be appalled at what I'm looking up for funsies, and you don't
Right,
want to have to.
I
approve
think
all
they mean fact-finding missions where you use staff resources to do that. Right, so it's not like you're looking stuff up in the background. You're saying, you know, hey, Will, I want a copy of every building permit for the last 5 years. You know,
So,
that would use staff
I
resources.
did that with Cindy. I said I would like a copy of all the HCA's before we had our conversation with Nature's Remedy. That's exactly just like that. I don't want to have to get that approved before I ask for stuff like that when I'm preparing for a meeting.
That's not a fact finding. I think that's public information. And that's something as a board member, I don't think that that's what this policy is. But is there a way you think we could structure the language on E
Yep.
to kind of capture that? To Colleen's point, that's part of our meetings. That's part of the your role as select board. We're allowed to have access to those records. That's our job. So,
But just after an initiative, just put using staff.
well, using staff to have.
I think I think we can massage that language as well.
Okay.
F, I think CIPC handles that, so strike that entirely.
Yep.
Well, CIPC is an advisory board still.
That falls under us, so
Okay, yeah, I just want to make sure everyone's aware of that. They're not like, they don't have any statutory authority other than that they are something that's real and they cover, something that, we all fought hard to get, right? So,
I just don't think it's a select board thing.
I don't either.
anyone else?
I mean, we've got a committee for that, and this, pretty much everything is within their purview.
Yeah.
Okay. Ray?
No, I'm fine.
Okay. G? Actually, just go down there. If anyone else doesn't have anything else, do you have anything else, Colleen?
Nope.
All right. Does anybody have anything they want to bring up? Otherwise, I'm just going to go right down the list here. Are we good with A? Silence is acceptance. Okay, B,
Where are we, on meeting procedures?
we are on 4, internal operation members interaction.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Okay, C,
So
okay, B,
quarterly on C
oh, C, okay.
seems like that's a little bit optimistic to me. I was thinking like semi-annually or like twice a year instead of quarterly.
So that kind of goes back to what Doreen had mentioned about adding, I believe it's F, annual goals meeting, and
Yep.
periodic evaluations on those, right?
I just think review of our goals.
Let's
maybe.
strike it all together because we're gonna see what, in my opinion, we're gonna see what that language of F looks like. when
I'd
it comes
agree with
back.
that.
Does anyone disagree with that? Let's see here. I'm just gonna say C, section 3. Okay. D, we already talked about. E, we talked about. F, we talked about. G. Okay. Moving on to H.
Well, H, we have a policy in place for this, right? And so it's agenda items need to be in by Thursday? Is that what it is?
And it gets covered further when we talk about the agenda. There's like an agenda section in this.
Yeah.
So there is from time to time like things that comes up as an emergency item,
Right.
but you know typically the chair will know about what those are in advance, right? If one of you were to say, you know, hey, I want to bring this up as an emergency item, you know, that's your objective, but again, the board ultimately decides at that point whether it wants to pursue it or not, right?
And I don't know if it necessarily needs to be an emergency item. It just wasn't reasonably anticipated when the agenda closed. It doesn't necessarily constitute an emergency. You know, a great example would be making an appointment last week. It was meant to be on the agenda. We kind of missed it. Reasonably, it could have been added, but now we're asking that person to come back a second night. So I don't think it necessarily needs to constitute an emergency. Just something that's not going to really change the flow of the meeting. It's not anything you have to add to the packet. Information's already there, kind of thing. And that's my point on that.
Well, there are items that come up as an emergency.
So
Emergency for
you
sure.
would say that's strictly routine.
Yeah, it could be. It just wasn't reasonably anticipated when the agenda was closed. That's, I think, the language I've seen repetitively in other documents. And if it wasn't reasonably anticipated, which I think a lot of committees in our town put that right on their agenda and discuss anything else that wasn't reasonably anticipated by the chair at the time this was posted, which I think is far too vague, but I think it's something we could live by that, all right, that, you know, we didn't anticipate talking about Jushi tonight, but it's on there because we need to discuss it. It's important. And that's why we amended the agenda and put it on. It's not an emergency, but it's important, and that's how it got on there.
So I agree with everything you're saying, but I'll say there's another standpoint to this, which is we do have to have some sort of deadline unless it's an absolute emergency. And I'll give the example of today. The last agenda was sent at 2 p.m. I work, and then I have to eat dinner and prepare for the meeting. So I went over the meeting agenda over the weekend when I had time. And that's when I did my research, and that's when I wrote my notes. And I can read emails, but I don't have time between 2 p.m. and a board meeting on a Tuesday to be prepared for a meeting with new agenda items added on. And we should have enough time for, unless it's an emergency, for all board members to be prepared for the meeting and prepared for discussion. So I feel like there should be some, if it's not Thursday, or maybe the first agenda goes out Thursday, there should be a timeline to make sure that all board members show up prepared for the meeting. You know, and
I agree with that, but it's hard because everybody's schedules are so different, right?
Right.
You know, I know it might be difficult for someone like you in that position, but maybe if everybody else is, we're making an exception for one person rather than.
but you have to, because we're a 5-member board.
I
and
get
it's-
that,
yeah.
but I mean, sometimes it's if it's in the best interest of Grafton to get something discussed.
It's in the best interest of Grafton to have all 5 of us prepared for the meeting, and I that's what I believe.
So I think
that-
I think the language in here though is pretty I think it covers both of the examples we just gave. We have an appointment, which I would classify all day long as a routine matter, right?
Yeah.
So that's something that it was missed, right? So I'm comfortable with that as a routine matter. Jushi is an emergency. We're holding up their merger, and we have a situation where they can potentially cut Grafton out of their merger agreement, and there's a lot of time pressure right now to making sure that we make something happen so that we're included in that merger. I consider that a complete emergency. So to me, that's covered by the language in here that
Yep.
says if you have an emergency situation.
And I think emergencies can show up and, we can give examples over the past year of things that we found out 2 hours before a meeting and it's like, well, we have to add this to the agenda because we have to deal with this. And those should absolutely be added to the agenda. But I think we have to be careful of routine items and amended agendas, not just for the board, but also for staff and also for the public, to make sure that there's a timeline on this is when we can't change the agenda
Yeah,
anymore.
and I think we have a policy that governs that, and I think
Yes.
it's a good framework. From time to time, okay, we have to suspend that agenda policy from time to time. And when that does arrive, that's where communication comes and we discuss that and we figure out, how do we get to the meeting? I think the way H is written, specifically to your point about strictly routine nature, which need no prior research, is reasonable. I think the rest of the language in here strictly prevents or discourages an abuse of that. And I think that that's an important piece of what I'm going to read. Or which of our strictly routine nature which need action before the next regularly scheduled meeting. So in the event that something that is routine, we need to sign, a contract for salt. That's a pretty routine thing, okay, that we do in the fall before the winter hits. We need to get that done because we're going to have a snowstorm probably middle of next week and we don't have a meeting scheduled. That to me would constitute a routine thing that this board does, but because we need action before the next regularly scheduled meeting, we could take that up. So I think the way that H is written, I think covers that.
But regularly scheduled, does that mean this meeting tonight was a regularly scheduled meeting? We regularly have workshops. Does that count as getting on that meeting? It's not delineating that it's a workshop versus a traditional meeting, so.
Yeah, that was my other question too.
Well, okay, before we get into like workshops and scheduling of meeting, let's just talk about any agenda for that matter, because this could be a meeting that we're setting for a Thursday.
Right.
I'm just saying.
Yeah.
So the day of the week, I don't think matters.
No, but I think I could see people getting hung up on the fact that says, well, it's not a regularly scheduled meeting, it's a workshop, so we'll do the meeting after. So if I just say the next scheduled meeting, lose the word regularly.
We're going down a rabbit hole. on this one.
You would
I
call
like
that
the way
your-
it's written. We meet minimum three times a month, sometimes 4, 5. You've been around, we've had 6 meetings in 1 month.
I know.
Okay, I think
See, there are
it's
things
fine.
that come up as emergencies.
Right.
And it doesn't come up often, but sometimes items come up as an emergency. The person who brings it up makes a motion to take this up as an emergency item. It's really the only way it can get on the floor. And if the board votes to take it up as an emergency item, then it's on the floor.
But
If the
what-
board votes no, it goes away.
What if the chair doesn't accept the motion?
Chair has to accept every motion that's made and seconded.
Couldn't find the language
Yes.
of that though. Could you find me language somewhere? Cause I looked.
The
and I-
chair has to, the only person that cannot, that can say, I don't accept that motion is the moderator. That's it. Every chair of any board, committee, whatever it is, has to accept a motion. If it's seconded, it goes on the table for discussion. Has to, you
Then-
can't deny it.
When we get to agenda or meeting or whatever that section is, we need language stating that in this, because I couldn't find language for that anywhere else, and if that's how we're gonna operate in Grafton, we need to have that somewhere.
Well, that's how it should be, but you can't just say, well, I don't accept that.
Okay.
Well, I almost said something. Again,
But you could,
I
though.
was
Right
was
now you
moderator for
could.
21 years. There were motions that I did not accept, and I am the only one that could do that. There's no one else that can do that. If it's made and seconded, it's on the table for discussion.
But I could see it just spiraling where a motion was made and then a chair tries to, get in the way of that.
No, you can't.
But I
But
agree with you.
The only way it
I
doesn't
just
get
don't
on,
see
the only way it
today's
doesn't get on
language
is if
anywhere.
it's not seconded. If
Okay.
it's not seconded, then it goes away.
But
That's
so
true.
Where is the emergency item described? Like what you just said? Where is
Because it's
that?
subjective, right?
And why
What's an
can't-
emergency to me might be, I can wait 2 weeks on that for someone else.
Here's
then
what
the
we
board
said.
votes no,
Let's
so,
give an example of this,
you know.
because I think this will put it in context. A few weeks ago, we had public input into some legislation that was going in, that Evan brought to our attention. It was not reasonably anticipated that it was going to be put on our agenda. And I said through the board, does the board want to, remember I asked you, and you made the motion, it was seconded, so right there, because there was a pending decision, there was a deadline in which public input was necessary. That was outside of our control.
Yep.
A court date, or some decision, or a contract expires at 5 PM the next day. Those are things
Right.
that constitute
completely
an emergency.
reasonable.
So what about a meeting minutes that have a FOIA request that really need to get done, but they're getting put off? Would
Meeting
that
minutes.
constitute an emergency?
Meeting minutes for what? I'm sorry?
Like for example, executive session meeting minutes, that
Okay.
there's a FOIA request. I'm throwing
Yeah.
out, is that an example of where a motion could get made?
Evan's got his.
Yeah, I
hand
know.
up.
I'm just let Colleen finish, please, and then Evan, I'll
No, we'll
do
hear what Evan has to say.
Go ahead, Evan.
So an emergency is a sudden, generally unexpected occurrence or set of circumstances demanding immediate action per Mass General Law.
Did you just read that, or you had that memorized? You did. Okay.
Let's say I have it memorized.
And Evan,
Let's go with that.
the board has the right to not accept that, correct? Correct?
It just says that it's an emergency. That's all that section talks
But the
about.
board has to vote to put it on the table.
Okay, so guys, just on the
Okay.
language of H, okay, is that good as it stands?
It's fine with me.
Yep.
Okay,
I'm good with it.
let's move on to I, please. I'm sorry, I'm going backwards.
Oh, and
Let's go
Swirls
to
and
K.
Scoops is gonna be closed by the time we get out of here.
You know what? I'm doing your waist a favor.
Wow.
What's that shaming if I ever heard it?
You said that goes right to your hips,
I don't
right?
It does, it does.
Sometimes it goes to my head. I get brain freeze. So, all right. Okay. K. Does anyone have any objections to K? Okay. I think that wraps up section 4. Let's move on to section 5. All right. Anybody have anything up front before we go right down the list?
I like that the quorum consists of 2 members.
All right.
The shall be taken when practically only when the full board is in attendance. When practical only when the full. That part just I was like, what? What is
What
that?
number are you on?
I'm at the
We're
same
on
part. There are
meeting
2
A.
members.
Oh yeah.
General procedures.
Yep.
It's in the second paragraph. So that needs to change to 3 members.
Yep, I already did.
Can anyone explain to me what that language is trying to get across, or should we just remove it?
It's basically saying that if you are going to take a vote on something of critical importance, that as a general matter, you will do that with a full board, which is like when we were doing the appointments and we only had 3 members, but at the beginning you had said, should we do it when we have all members present? It just didn't work out timeline. That's what that sentence is trying to say.
How do we feel about that? Because we've historically never done that.
Look, I have always believed that a quorum of the board present is the quorum of the board present. We've had this situation about 2 years ago. So if there is 3 members here and 2 members, it goes 2 members to 1, then that's the quorum of the vote at that time, regardless of who's present and who's not.
Yeah.
That's I think that's
I
very
agree.
cut and clear.
Yep.
But I don't believe that there should be. I mean, I think there should be some consideration, but I think again that goes down to if you leave a knucklehead as the chair, then that's the board's dilemma. You know what I mean? Not the knucklehead who's running the
I
meeting.
just want to say that I have not said that word again since I said it once, and it's come up multiple times.
It's the robust of the evening. But, or if we add verbiage that saying that if the absent member requests to put on hold, because that has happened too, where it was, did anybody ask to hold off that wasn't gonna be here? No, or yes, and then we just push it off.
If you're not here, you're not here.
I get it.
I just think.
I'm always here
It
though,
uses
so
the word,
that's not a problem
it
for me.
uses the word practical twice, so the intent of this and the flavor of it is, it's a practical policy, it's not a law, so.
None of this is, so
if,
it's all,
If one of the board members, and we've done this several times, says, hey, I really wanna be there for this agenda item, we almost always do that.
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So, I'm fine with this language as it is.
Okay. A third paragraph. Anyone good? We don't typically, when we say split votes, identify by name unless we're under a full Zoom meeting. We do roll call anyways. But
Right.
do we want to strike the split votes will be identified by name?
Yeah, I don't get
I
that, but
wanna strike that, for sure.
Okay. Okay. B, regular meetings.
So I don't think that's our accurate schedule there, but
Right.
No. So it's the first, third Tuesdays. Okay.
so the department assistant who supports the town administrator is responsible for taking minutes. Should that say who supports the select board?
Oh, I'm just going through the rest of this.
Yeah, it just needs to be tweaked to what we do here and not what I was doing when I wrote this original section.
Like it.
So I can make those edits. We don't have to talk about all of them here. I can
Great.
make it fit Grafton.
Okay. Okay. Everyone all set on B?
Yep.
Moving on to C, agenda packet. So we have a. Okay, yep,
the only different thing in that is that we get that draft. on
Right.
Wednesday.
Wednesday.
Mhm.
That's it.
I can add that language.
Okay. Anything else? Moving on to D, joint meetings.
Wish we had more of them.
Okay, E. Hearing nothing, going to F. Okay, G. All right, H. Now we get into emergency meetings.
Well,
So-
that's different than what we were talking about, Peter. Instead of, this is meeting, this is an emergency meeting.
Right.
Mhm.
The other thing was just putting something on the agenda
Yep.
as an emergency.
So are we okay with, in G, it's basically saying the majority of your executive sessions are at the tail end of the meeting? That's not generally been our practice. I like that, but
No, I agree. Executive session should be at the end.
Yeah.
Unless it's like something so quick that you can do in less than 10 minutes.
Right.
Well, sometimes we have to have consultants and staff or certain people attend those meeting minutes, and it's difficult for them to I think as a courtesy, I think, you know, when we're having someone who's billing us, you know, let's say $300 an hour, having them in the beginning of the meeting, you know, is somewhat easier than having them stand by and wait until the end of the meeting. I think for
Right.
the most part, when there's not somebody who we need, you know, it should be at the end of the meeting. But
So do we just want to get rid of that language then?
I would prefer it to be gone. It gives the board more flexibility, I
I
think,
agree.
in setting those meetings. Just for someone who's done it now for a year and a
I
half.
mean, the language is everywhere else though too, but
Evan,
So it does say, if practicable, other than a few minutes in duration, executive sessions other than a few minutes in duration will be scheduled at the end of open meeting. So it's just if it's practical. If you want to do it at the beginning because there's some other circumstance, I think the language allows you to do that.
Yeah, you can.
And if it's
Okay.
going to be really short, you know, it says other than a few minutes in duration will be scheduled at the end of open meeting.
Yeah.
And I think that's just to keep you from, or the idea of that language is just that, you know, as you all know, meetings tend to go longer than you originally anticipated pretty consistently. And if you're doing that prior to your meeting, then you run into your open session issue.
okay.
I think that's all that's trying to do.
Anyone else on G? Okay, H, emergency meetings. Okay, that's it for 5. Going on to 6.
I have just one quick thing to add. So I didn't know, and when it was brought up before, do we want to put anything about workshops in here? Because we're defining meetings as meetings and meeting twice a month. Do we want to put meetings and workshops, or do we want a separate section for what workshops are for? Or just leave it alone?
I think all meetings are meetings, and you know, I know we try to have a workshop setting where we can spitball and brainchild, and I think that's great. But I don't think a workshop should prevent us from getting business done and holding up things that are important in Grafton. And tonight's a great example of that. And I think putting language in there could prevent us from doing just that.
You know, again, I think that's subjective in nature. What constitutes, you know, a business meeting? I think, you know, the purpose, you know, chair sets the agenda, and practice has been we wanted to have workshops that are not focused on business items. But to your point, any meeting that we post and put an agenda out there is a meeting. If we just call it a workshop, just so it is more of like, we can do all of these items. Can you imagine if we did this last Tuesday? We'd be here till 1 in the morning, okay? We've been an hour and 47 minutes, you know, just on a couple
But
of
who's
discussion
counting?
items. I just see the clock in front of me. So I want to, you know, be sure that, you know, in the point, if we've got something scheduled, but I do work with Evan's office to make sure that we try to reserve these middle meetings so the board can have a broader policy discussion and have this opportunity in open to have its, you know, have its discussion and not feel like it's being rushed or we have to skip over agenda items like we did last Tuesday. So I think that's, you know, a meeting is a meeting is a meeting, but just that's just how we operate. And if there is something that we have to take up and it's reasonable, as long as we post it 48 hours in notice, then I think we're fine.
So I'm under the belief that we should have business meetings and workshops, even if we were only to have one workshop a month. I do believe that if an emergency comes up, we should always add it to the agenda if needed. If we're meeting, we should be able to do that. But I guess my question is, depending on how this board feels, we need to clarify then, are there only 2 meetings a month, or are we saying there's 4 meetings a month? Because we have, 2 workshops and 2, no, we have 1
No.
workshop and 2
Two
business
meetings,
meetings.
3.
So we should put 3 instead of 2, if that's what we are doing.
Are you talking about the beginning of this section?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
He already mentioned that. We're
Yeah.
gonna take care of that.
But
So we're gonna say we have 2 meetings and a workshop.
no, they're saying we're having 3 meetings.
Well,
But
you
no
could say
workshop.
section I. What I would recommend if you want to propose like a new section that says that the second meeting of every month will constitute, you know, in theme, a workshop, but put in there if it's reasonable and that we have to take up some items, you know, to Colleen's point, it gives the board the flexibility to do
Oh,
that,
sure.
and it's not
Yeah.
being extremely rigid.
But
So
we-
I wrote, the board meets as scheduled on the first, second, and third Tuesday of each month at 7 p.m. unless otherwise scheduled. So it's not saying what it is, because we don't have to say what it is. It's a meeting, we're meeting. I know that that's what we're attempting to do, but I don't think we should define it and pigeonhole ourselves. These are the 3 days that we're attempting to meet. We might meet more. But those are what we typically do, first, second, and third Tuesday of each month. Boom.
I'm fine with that. I'm
Me
not
too.
gonna,
I
I'm
just
not
think-
gonna get hung up on what we call
I
it.
think we just need to identify exactly that, like when we're meeting, and not the first and third Tuesdays, because what that says to me in this is that we don't meet the second Tuesday, and we do.
No, I know, but,
Yeah.
right, we, yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
all right, just
We're all
making
on the
sure.
same page.
Yep.
You're good.
Section 5. Agenda procedure, responsibility. A, anyone have any comments?
Nope.
B? Okay, yep. Is that in line with our policy, Evan?
You're on mute.
We got really far in this meeting without doing that. No, it is not, and I will make those
Okay.
tweaks.
All right. C, format and contents.
It's different than ours. Ours looks
Yep.
a lot more.
So if you want, I can format it to what we have currently here.
Okay.
It's weird to me, like announcements are number 8 on this one. I feel like that, I like that we do that first.
Backup data. So just ideally, I like to have all the backup data and pertinent information for the discussion, as they appear on the agenda, like, out there, by Friday, before, gives ample amount of time for everyone to do all the preparation. From time to time, I just want to state this, just from my experience, some things just don't get ready until Monday morning. Does the board still is boards okay with that, from a timing perspective? Does it want to set a deadline? Because it's really subjective if we don't have, supporting documentation. The chair can say, we're tabling this for another meeting. You can leave that to the chair in those certain circumstances, but this is just a point where we could discuss it now to see if it wants to operate that way or want to make a change.
But if you're anticipating that, which it sounds like in that example you are, in the packet where you say, talking about this topic, you just write that little one sentence thing, material anticipated to be ready by Monday at 9.
Yeah.
And then we'll all mentally prepare for that. And if
Yeah.
it comes out, Tuesday at 6, it's like, well, we're tabling that. It didn't meet what we had all expected it to meet.
I agree with that, and I don't think handing out materials on Monday is unreasonable, especially if we know it's going to be on the agenda.
Okay. Okay. All right, moving on to 7, notice of hearings. I think that's pretty straightforward. We're bound by, for certain public hearings, we must abide by Mass General Law. Anyone have any questions or comments?
I think these more relate to when we get down to decisions, it seems like
Nope.
they're planning board related.
Oh,
so-
some of the other ones? Yeah, we'll get to that in a
Hearings
second.
and decisions.
Even hearings, because we don't swear people in for like a poll petition.
Right.
All right.
So on number 7, we're okay, guys? I just want to make sure we say that.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you. Now moving on to 8. All right. So in the past, the chair has sworn in certain participants for certain hearings, like on
Yeah,
liquor
dog
violations.
hearings, liquor license hearings, stuff like that.
Yeah, violations. These
Yeah.
are more violations than
Yep.
there are, for, like you said, for a poll hearing and so on and so
Mm.
forth. Do you still want that to be the case, Evan?
No, it should not be the case.
It should not be the case.
No, I should delete that out.
Why is that?
Because you don't have the authority to swear anyone in. You are not presiding over a court, and so that is a past practice of many select boards. But I did have a case in which we ran into problems with the swearing in process,
Okay,
and so that should just be stricken right out of there.
okay. with that rationale, then four, the applicant or should be their representative shall present the case to the board. Should we strike the word case and just say
Yep.
situation?
Yes, yep. Situation, please.
Okay, and five,
So do we have to do number 2?
Yeah, we generally do. The chair gives a little spiel at the beginning that goes over that section of the law.
Okay.
It tells them that's basically what their rights are under that section.
and that's specific to the type of hearing we're having. Right, any other questions on 8? Moving on to 9.
Oh, I'm sorry, Peter. The hearing shall be closed and no further evidence shall be heard.
That's
That, once the hearing's closed, that's the time for the board to discuss. But
Yeah, but
we don't have
you're
to
not
write
gonna-
that down.
you're not going to take evidence.
No,
right?
no, you're not gonna take any more. Okay.
No, evidence
Okay.
should be stricken, but
Right,
no
so-
further exhibits or discussion from the,
Right.
yeah, public will be heard, yeah.
From the public, right? You can all still do whatever you need to.
Yep. So we'll strike that last part of that sentence on number 7 on section 8. Okay,
Well, no further evidence shall be
shall
heard.
be heard, yes,
Well, once you close the hearing, you legally can't take any more evidence.
right. So just write it in the sense that, you know, there shall be no further input or exhibits shared with the
Okay.
select board, yep.
Understood.
Get rid of anything that's court related, that's, you know, evidence is court stuff related, or, and to your point, we're not a court. All right, so decisions on number 9.
I'll strike special permit.
Yeah, you can probably. I believe that whole section needs to be deleted.
Yep,
It doesn't apply in Grafton.
so we're gonna strike 9, okay. Okay,
Fees, we don't have any.
actually, we do.
You do. Yep.
Building.
We do have fees. Mhm. Any questions?
This relates to a project review fee. We're not involved in any of that. This sounds like more like a planning board. I mean, I'm not sure what fees we charge people to review.
Building permits,
Yeah.
liquor licenses.
Oh, yeah, no, we set the fee rate. But does this actually relate to that?
Yeah, I don't think you're calling it a project review fee. But that's your third party review that you're doing for building permits right now.
So it says the select board may impose administrative fees and project application review fees as may be applicable. An administrative fee shall be assessed to offset the expense of the review of the select board in its office. We don't have any fees like that, do we? For project review?
All of this.
Yeah, what expense are we causing by reviewing something?
Yeah,
It's okay.
review plans.
I'll rewrite that to be consistent with what you're doing for third party review
Okay,
because that's what it's saying.
okay.
So I'll change the language
So
to
third-party review as it relates to building permits, correct?
Yeah.
Correct.
And
Okay.
Yep.
recreation too,
Or-
right?
Yep.
Yeah.
It deals with a whole bunch of stuff. It's outside. You might want third party review for conservation. You might want third
Yep.
party review for zoning. You can do a lot of that. So I'll reword it so that it matches more the language that Grafton uses.
Thanks.
Okay, so 2, the fee waiver. Good. 3, refund.
Refund.
Yeah, I think all of these, Evan, under
Give money
fees, need to be reworked a little bit. schedule
Okay.
of fees.
We don't have a schedule of fees for the building department?
I think we have
Yeah, we do.
schedule of fees of like, rental of certain things. Like we have a schedule of fees, for example, for the use of the Grafton Common, the gazebo, and all that sort of thing.
Right.
Does
And for-
that work in this document, or
Right.
is this like a whole separate policy where it should get a little bit more nitty gritty and into the details and into the weeds?
This is just saying it's going to do that. To your point, I do think like individual policies that identify certain assets of the town, we could have more refined policies, but yes, I think there needs to be both.
Okay.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. My favorite, conflict of interest. Does anyone have any issues with this? Bring it up with the state. Okay. 12. Role of the select board.
So,
Yes, instead of he or she, just write they.
Yeah, I
yeah,
like remove all chairman, make it
Yeah.
chair. Yes, yeah.
Yeah, we'll do that for sure. Hey, Will, let's do that, okay?
Anything you say, boss.
It's supposed to be informal. You can call him Evan.
Even his name boss?
Yes.
Oh,
It-
that's what I thought.
That is my name, yes.
All right.
so, in 1F,
Mhm.
I agree with the avoiding political patronage, but when it says judging only by merit, experience, and qualifications, there's specific language which kind of promotes diversity in your appointment process in the MMA handbook, and I'd like to align with that. It talks about things like, how long you've lived in town, where you live in town, your age, to try to really promote diverse boards and committees. So I think just what you'd be judging on them, to just align that with the MMA handbook.
Okay,
What section?
This is 1F.
1F.
Thank you.
You sunk my battleship. It's a workshop. Come on.
I should just slam my thing down. All right. Number 2. All right. Number 3. Okay.
Gosh, we're done.
So we'll bring this back, Evan, probably in the September timeframe. Give you time to go over that. I'm sure members will have some other questions, okay, on just some of the content that we discussed tonight. Reach out to Evan and William and get clarification, and if we have to bring something back to have a further discussion, please let me know in advance, and we'll make sure we add that component to the agenda to make sure that we cover it. Okay, thank you very much. That was, wow. We got through that. Okay. Good work by us. Okay. This is where I get to pat ourselves on the back. Yes. All right. Next up, we have Grafton Upton Railroad, East Street, Waterville Street, train engine horn crossing. So this is a request by Ray to put on here. Ray, do you want to just bring up what you want to discuss?
Yeah, so I met with Carmen and his wife and actually a couple of neighbors. That morning, or the day before, the train horn from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m., they blew the train horn 40 times. And the reason that they do that is because when I was there, the train pulled up, the crossing signs went down on Ray Street and on East Street, and then it backed into Washington Mills. And then it pulled back out again, it did it again, and then it backed into Washington Mills again. But what the big issue is that it comes across Waterville Street, and it starts loading the rail lines that they have up there, the spurs. So this was, like I said, 40 times. What I told them was that I would bring it up at a workshop, which I brought it up at a workshop, and that we would ask Evan, and I know, Evan, you wrote that big, long, the big, long explanation and everything like that, but what we didn't find out, and what we still don't know, or I don't know, is the people from the Grafton and Upton said that the only way to stop blowing the horns is to make East Street one way. And I'd just like to find out why we have to make East Street one way for them to stop blowing the horns, when originally they talked about not blowing the horns when we got the crossing gates in. So that's, we just need to find that out, and let these people know. I mean, 40 times from 7 to 9 AM, it's not, it's not like a little Volkswagen Bug blowing the horn down the road. It's pretty loud, and keep in mind, everybody who lives down there knows they live near the tracks. There's no doubt about that. They know that. They've lived there for, 60 years or 70 years, whatever it is. But I did tell them that I would bring it to a workshop, and that we would get the information and either talk with the railroad or find out what possibly we could do to help them out. That's all. Evan, did you freeze?
No, I'm here.
Oh, okay.
I thought somebody else would say something. I'm happy to do that, Ray. No problem.
Yeah, it's annoying. I mean, the traffic on Waterville Street is pretty bad too. And that whole area is just gonna get worse and worse, and I'm not even sure what the solution is to that, but, I told him that I would bring that up, and we'd go from there.
Go ahead, Doreen.
So, my recollection is that the railroad told us it was about safety. So the barriers that went in, but also they talked about making East Street a one-way. Now, the town, particularly that neighborhood, was adamantly against making East Street one way.
I'm sure.
So I think where we are is talking to the railroad and saying, we're not doing that. We're not making East Street one way.
Yep.
It's already a terrible intersection. We cannot do that. What else can we do for safety mechanisms so you do not have to blow the horn 40 times through a residential neighborhood? Because that's one solution that isn't going to work for Grafton, and I don't recall a conversation after that once we decided that would not work.
Because I don't think there really was, and that's why
No.
they have to blow it so many times, because of the number of streets they're crossing and
Yeah.
backing up, and there's
Oh, yeah,
just,
they have to do
they
the
have
sequence
to,
for
they
each
have
street.
to
Yeah.
do it, and there's so many streets, and the railroad's like, this is what we can do, and it won't even stop it, it'll just reduce
And
it a little.
It's a federal law. too.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So it's kind of like they're against it, and that's fine, but I don't know if there's anything the railroad really can offer, but it's great to ask.
Yeah, it's good to ask, because if that was one suggestion by them, and we went out, I think we did a poll, and we had a public meeting in that area of town, and it was very clear that the neighborhood, but also just overall residents of Grafton said, no, this would be a terrible idea to make this one way. Really, for our emergency too, like how do you get police through there and ambulances
Well,
through
that's,
there? And,
so that's the issue. So you have, it's a public safety issue because you have Ray Street, East Street, and Waterville Street
right.
closed, and there's no set, it's not like they're coming by at 55 miles an hour.
Right.
They're coming by at 2 miles an hour.
know.
And then they stop right in the middle of the intersection. All three are still closed. If you had to get an ambulance, police car, fire truck, you're not getting down there. And they don't move fast.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
So it is, it is a pretty big issue.
I have to go back and I could send you, I think I've got the meeting minutes for that. So this board, prior to a majority being on here, I think Doreen, you and I were here, to your recollection. We had the Grafton Upland Railroad in here, and what led to the whole, if you recall, the one-way of East Street was that was the only way that they could get the arms and the barriers because the way that it would have been constructed, you can't do it with a two-way street with the amount of property that they have at that very corner between Waterville and East Street. Walking the property with the general manager was extremely beneficial. Okay, as you're walking it with them and talking about what are they allowed to do and what they are not allowed to do was very, very limiting. I think it's a good question to ask. Like, you know, it might be good for this board to get reminded again. You know, why that was presented. Why is that the only option presented? And are there any other options? I feel it's something that you all should ask as well. But I know when I asked that there were very limited options. I don't think the federal law's changed much
No,
since we've talked to them over about a year and a half ago. But there is a meeting I think is important that you should watch when they're in here to discussing what that design looked like and why they were proposing that and why the residents were like, no, we're not in agreement of making that section of East Street down to, I forget the road that that connects it to Waterville Street, but to that part.
Prospect.
Thank you. Ricky Morris is going to be upset that I forgot the name of the street.
If it turns out the railroad can't do anything, is it worth revisiting the conversation of making it a one-way again to see are you guys still against it? Like, you know, we double checked with the railroad. They still said that's our only option, so we're bringing it back to you, just to follow it all the way through. I mean, granted, I'm pretty sure we know the answer, but it doesn't hurt to ask again if we're asking the railroad again, you know.
Yeah, I just want to, like, you know, is there something that this board needs to decide on, I guess? And until some new development comes along, is that something that, to your point, can we just have Evan have a conversation with the railroad? And if there is something, it gets brought to our attention. If not, then we communicate that to
Yeah.
the community.
Yeah, I just think that, like I said, I told them that I would do this. I mean, there's also the house on the corner of Waterville Street across from Carmen's house, where Dr. Rogers used to have his veterinary clinic there. There was the railroad did a taking in their easement, what they said was in their easement. And that was disputed by the homeowner. And they came in and just took down all the trees.
Yeah, the arborvitae.
Yeah, they took all the arborvitaes down and didn't even tell her that they were doing that. And there were two different lot lines there, and, you know, unfortunately, it costs a lot of money to try to get that resolved, but that's, you know, that's just another thing. But I think if we can, you know, get an answer, find out why does East Street need to be one way? And if it's a law, and it's a federal law, it has to do with trains, then there's nothing we're gonna be able to do about this, other than to ask them if they can just stop blowing the horns. So, that's all.
Okay. So at this point, does the board okay with just having Evan follow up with Mike Malinowski from the Grafton Upton Railroad? And then if there's anything that needs to be brought back to us, like for further discussion, then we'll leave that up to Evan?
That sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay.
And right, thanks for bringing it up again. I think it's time. I mean, we've heard from residents in the past. We've heard from Carmen in the past, and we, you know, went down this path. But I think it's really important to continue to bring it up, you know, every year or two, just to make sure, because it's a terrible issue. I think, you know, I mean, I can't imagine, and especially for people who have lived in that neighborhood for 50, 60, 70 years and have to deal with this. So
Yep.
I think it's the least we can do to continue to have the conversation.
And the public safety issue,
Exactly.
yeah, definitely.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, William.
I don't know if you're taking public input on this, but there is an attendee with their hand raised.
No, this is just our discussion today, just internally. I would have invited the public if we had a public outreach meeting, and I think depending upon how this goes, if there's a future meeting, and we decide that, we'll invite the public and that person can come at that meeting,
Okay.
obviously, in the future. Yeah.
Can I ask who it is?
Does it matter?
No, I don't know. I mean, if they were sitting here in person, I would know who it was.
It is Ann Foley.
All right, so let's move on to community host agreement. So thank you for taking this up as last minute change the agenda. So we're bringing this back tonight because there's some timing that the board is concerned about. I want to hand this over to Matt. Matt, did you want to take over the conversation?
Sure.
Take it up first.
Yeah, I guess for me, I just wanted to get an update from Evan, because I know you've been in discussions with our town council, just in terms of, you know, where you see things with Marchetti, and, you know, what your sort of basic approach is at this point, and then we can have some further discussion on it.
Sure. I am unmuted, correct? Yes. Okay, good. So I have been in talks with town council, a little back and forth on trying to answer some of the questions you had at your last meeting. So essentially, I asked, what's the impact of the Marchetti HCA on the ability of Grafton to enter another HCA with Jushi? And we have come to the conclusion that it needs to be terminated first. We do have a termination document that we're working on. We have that pretty well drafted, and should have that ready to go probably by the end of this week. The next question was, could we put language in the HCA that requires, in this case, it would be Jushi to come before the board annually or sooner for updates on the status of the process. We can add that language. There's no provision that says we cannot. We can also add an expiration date, and I believe you could tie that return before the board language to the expiration date. So basically like almost like a renewal, but I don't think we can call it that. So basically they would have to come in and say, let's pick a date once a year. And if they, fail to do so, you could terminate the agreement. And what was sorry, too many windows here. I also asked about adding the race to the finish line language into the HCA, and we can do that. And so we're working on that language too. Ray had talked about the pro forma or timeline for construction and whether or not we can put it into the HCA, and we're still working on that question of whether or not it lives in the HCA or if it's something else.
Got it.
That's it in a nutshell. That's condensed, obviously, and I'm happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Cool. So I thought it was important for us to prepare for next week's meeting, to understand the direction that the board wanted to go with before we meet with Jushi and Nature's Remedy. Evan, that helps a lot kind of clarify the situation that we've got to actually terminate one agreement before we can enter into another agreement. I personally am in favor of entering a new agreement rather than trying to do a transfer. Go ahead.
Sorry, I should have included that. So in theory, they're calling it a transfer, but it's really not a transfer. There's no provision that you transfer an HCA from one to the other. It's essentially you're terminating the agreement with Nature's Remedy and forming a new one with Jushi. I believe they're using the word transfer because they anticipate that you're going to take the exact same provisions of Nature's Remedy, change the name to Jushi, and that is now the new HCA. So I feel kind of like that word, the term transfer is kind of strategy as opposed to what is actually occurring.
So then did the Nature's Remedy HCA get terminated?
No.
It
And-
didn't.
No.
So we would need to terminate two.
What's that?
We would need to terminate two then, Marchetti and Nature's Remedy.
Right. So you're basically you would do that at the same time. And I don't think that's, I don't think the board would get hung up on that part because I think we would do that as one fell swoop,
yeah.
right?
But
We would
Marchetti is
terminate
not
Remedy.
Nature's Remedy. They're different.
Right.
It's in the
So
same
Marchetti
HCA.
has to be
No, it's not
terminated
Nature's
outright
Remedy.
in order to do anything.
Yes.
So Marchetti has to be terminated outright. Nature's Remedy, you would terminate in conjunction with forming the new HCA
Gotcha.
with
Okay,
If does that make sense?
Yes.
it does.
Okay.
Has anybody heard from Marchetti? Do you know where that stands on getting that terminated? Is that our responsibility to get done, or
Yeah, I'm working on that.
okay?
That's a little grayer. I think we can just terminate.
That was my question. So we could vote and terminate next week and then let them know that we terminated the
That-
contract.
That's my preliminary understanding, yes,
Okay,
but I
good.
just want to be clear, I'm still working on that
Okay.
procedural part.
And the additional language that you're working out on the Jushi new HCA, how far in advance do you need to provide that to them for them to agree to it, to have it all go off on Wednesday or Tuesday?
That would probably be up to you. You would have to agree to. So there's two ways to do it. You either give me the general things that you think are important that need to be in the HCA and say, town administrator, you go negotiate the contract and let us know when it's time to vote it, or if it fails or whatever it is, you come back to us. Or you would have to have them in to negotiate this next week, and that would probably be the first pass at the draft document that I'll deliver to you.
They should. Not that Evan can't negotiate this deal, but I think they should be before the board in this whole deal. So in other words, if we're gonna renegotiate an HCA, they should be here. They hear what the board says. We hear what they say. Again, this is not something that, even though we're gonna probably issue a new HCA in this situation, they need to know that we're gonna put timelines on it, that it's not gonna go on for 4 or 5 years, and, I think one of the things is that, in the HCA, that there should be a restriction or a requirement for them to be under construction, not just a building permit, under construction within 12 months of the award of the HCA.
I think that's a little prescriptive, but I definitely like the idea of an expiration date to get them back before us so that we can have those conversations and say, what's going on.
I'd agree with that, and I think, Evan mentioned, annually, they put a 12-month timeline on their own process,
Right.
right, in alignment with their planning board extension. So I don't see any reason that we wouldn't put a 1-year expiration on this.
Right.
I
Agreed.
like the idea of putting the, first to the finish language right in the HCA so that it's very clear that we're sort of protected. Looking at the two Marchetti and Nature's Remedy agreements, that was, a little bit concerning to see two agreements that substantially referred to the same facility.
Right.
We don't want to be in that situation either. So, yeah, I'd be more in favor of the approach where we outline our broad asks, and I think, Evan, what you basically the additional language, I consider those to be minor amendments. I'm comfortable just asking Evan to draft something for us and bring it to the meeting on Tuesday so that we can all look at it together.
I am too.
I would like to have Evan reach out to them and give them a heads up of what we're doing too. I don't want them to feel sidelined a second time.
I'd agree with that.
And their planning board extension, that's for Nature's Remedy. That's not for Jushi.
Right.
So if that gets extended to Nature's Remedy, then they're gonna have to come back before the planning board again to transfer it to Jushi.
Yep.
So they get their work cut out for them.
Any other questions? Evan, do you have enough information to move forward?
Yeah, just for clarity's sake, let's say I finish that document up on Friday and send it to the board, are we sending the draft of the document with our prospective changes
I
to?
I mean,
to them.
you're getting feedback from us on provisions in, okay, here's our HCATU entity, whoever it is. They're either going to agree or disagree to it.
Right.
And if they disagree with it, they may counter with something. And I think, in my opinion, I think we're on agreement on what we're asking Evan to put in here for provisions. I think they're pretty straightforward. I don't think it's anything super complex.
Agreed.
So I think if, the board is comfortable with this, that Evan, you reach out to Jushi and say, pending, transference of real property, do you agree to this HCA? And then that's something you bring back to the board on Tuesday. Because if you don't hear anything from them and they're not able to come back with any determination, then what's the point of putting this on Tuesday's meeting? Because you already have the agreement in hand and you're waiting to hear back feedback from them. So really the ball's in their court. They've got
Right, yeah,
time.
exactly. I didn't, to Colleen's point, I didn't know, like, we don't want to drag them in and hand them a piece of paper at the meeting and say, this is what we expect. you to
Yeah,
do."
Right.
I think that's
And
completely.
and have them say no.
No, I mean, Evan,
I just want to make, we're all on the same
Yeah.
page. I
Yeah,
think.
no,
Yeah.
just reach out to them, tell them what's going on,
Yep.
and set the expectation that we'll get it as soon as we can. But that moves this whole process forward, a significant step, and it allows us potentially to make some decisions on Tuesday. And I think they'll be as motivated as we are to get this moving.
Yeah, I mean, we want this to happen.
Yep.
But we need specific deadlines that it's not gonna sit around on the table, for the next 5 years.
Absolutely.
Wonderful.
Okay, anything else?
And I was gonna buy tonight at Swoops and Squirrels.
You didn't say that, Ray.
I didn't?
You should-
I thought I
no,
said
you
that
had
when I
said-
came in.
No,
had
you were
said
talking
that.
about your shorts, showing off your legs.
Knuckleheads.
Knuckle.
There we
All right,
go.
I missed that.
Okay. All right, thank you very much, everyone. If there is anything else, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great night.